Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning, Stephen.
In your column today, you charge Communication Minister Malcolm Turnbull with talking baloney. This isn't something he's normally accused of, so tell me more.
Well, he was trying to explain away Tony Abbott's promise, which was that there'd be no cuts to the ABC or SBS, and obviously what Malcolm Turnbull announced this week were swingeing cuts. But in doing that, what he said was, well, Tony Abbott said this on the eve of the election in one interview, but I, Malcolm Turnbull and Joe Hockey had been making it clear on many occasions that the ABC couldn't expect to be exempt from across-the-board cuts. But he really, I think, totally stretched the point, because ordinary people would think, well, if a man who seemed at that stage, election eve, to be certain to become Prime Minister, said something, surely that was the last word on it, rather than having to go back to what shadow ministers had been saying. After all, they don't get as much publicity as the leader. And then when he tried in detail to talk about what might have been in Tony Abbott's mind, it was really incomprehensible.
I don't suppose this could be super cunning, a sort of et tu Malcolm kind of strategy to draw attention to the broken promise?
Well, he was having to answer questions, but maybe you could see it as distancing himself from Tony Abbott, but whatever it was, I think it didn't look good, because there's so much emphasis now on broken promises.
Well, can we delve into why, and perhaps add higher education in as well? The ABC is generally trusted by the population, and there are plenty of Liberal voters that watch nothing else or listen to nothing else than the ABC. There are plenty of Liberal voters who want their children to go to university and are worried about the HEX debt that they might acquire. In the case of higher education, there were in fact repeated assurances in 2013 that there'd be no changes to funding arrangements, and then 2 days before the election there'd be no cuts, according to Tony Abbott. So why are they doing this on both fronts when their own heartland might be alarmed by it?
I think it's a measure of the extent to which this is an ideological government, and we're really seeing this over a whole number of areas. You mention those two, but there are other areas as well. Their push, for example, on changing the Labor legislation on financial advice is another one. Climate change is a special one. It is a government that is substantially driven by ideology. Now, a number of these areas you can see as a reform ideology. For example, the government believes that education should be run in a different way. A quest like pursuing the ABC, however, just doesn't seem to have even that underlying purpose about it. It just seems an obsession which really is not particularly productive for the government, but that it's determined at all stages to pursue. This is not just the fact they're cutting the ABC, because governments perennially have done this, but also, for example, that Malcolm Turnbull was saying that Mark Scott, their managing director, shouldn't have the function of being editor-in-chief. Well, that can be seen just as fitting in with the general coalition attack on the organisation.
Well, also this week, the non-silence of the Lambie continued, and you mentioned the overturning of the financial advice regulations. I'm wondering whether a split in the Palmer United Party might not help Labour organise the numbers in the Senate, whereas there might have been an assumption that it would help the government if Palmer United broke up.
I think you're right. It's very hard to know how this would work out in practice, but on the principle that anything that makes the Senate more fluid works potentially to the opposition's advantage. Now, I do stress potentially, because they have to actually mobilise these people to their causes, but what we saw this week was a very clever operation by Labor's Sam Dastyari, of course a former director or State Secretary of the New South Wales ALP, They're used to organising the numbers up there, and he showed his skill this week in doing that, especially in conjunction with Senator Nick Xenophon, who felt strongly about the issue and is also a person who's regarded well right across the spectrum in the Senate.
I heard Clive Palmer on the radio this morning saying that people need to sit down and talk through their differences. This is a man who lists litigation as one of his hobbies. Do you think he's worried about the situation with Jackie Lambie?
Well, I think he must be concerned because it does diminish his power. It's already diminished his power. If she formally breaks with the party, which sooner or later surely she must do, then that is a further diminution, and therefore he would not want this to happen, but he doesn't have much power to stop it. She's very unpredictable. Even if she stayed, it's a very difficult group for him to now manage, and he had a bit of trouble managing himself yesterday because in his late line interview, as soon as his business affairs were raised, he was out of there.
Finally, Michelle, the opinion polls, generally it seems as if after preferences, Labour are 10 points ahead. They're doing well in Victoria and in Queensland. It's possible the population is reacting badly to the ideology that you've been talking about. Is there within the government a champion of common sense that can bring it back to a more pragmatic approach?
I think a few of the backbenchers will be championing common sense. They'll be saying, let's think about the fact that, okay, the next election is 2 years away, but people's attitudes become set, and if you're trailing in the opinion polls all through, this is not a good thing. And so there'll be some voices of reason there, but it is quite hard for the government to reset its style, let alone its agenda. It's committed to a whole lot of things. The budget situation is getting worse. We'll soon have the mid-year budget update, and that'll show a huge deficit looming, and so it actually getting to a different stand is not easy, but the government does need to do something.
Michelle Grattan, many thanks for your time.
Thanks, Stephen.